That alone, reading verse number 7, my orphanage in the Guru. Do not wake any more, and without sleeping remain as knowledge. If you are unfit for this, then keep yourself in the service of those contemplatives who live free from birth, awakened to Om. Commentary. This verse sounds paradoxical, at least when we hear it for the first time. Narayana Guru instructs the seeker to remain steadfast, merged in knowledge, without having the need to alternate between the states of waking and sleeping. To be wakeful during the day and to sleep at night is an experience which man shares with most living beings. Is it within our power to inhibit the automation of nature that governs our sleeping and waking habits? Is it possible to rid our consciousness of its tri-basic fragmentation and keep it blazing without flickering? The word the Guru uses repeatedly from the opening verse to the present is ariva, meaning the word or knowledge. We often think of knowledge as merely pieces of information. To correct such a faulty notion at the very outset, the Guru qualifies this knowledge as arivilum eri, the knowledge that surpasses all knowledge. It is further described as that which is seen as the outside world and experienced within as one's subjective awareness. In the 6 previous verses, there are indirect references to 6 possible differentiations within the field of one's experience. In the first verse, it is given as the inner world, the outer world, and the knowledge that knows both. In the second verse, the Guru presents a graded hierarchical series: the psychic dynamics, the senses, the body, and the many worlds that are the objects of perception. These together constitute the total body of experience. In the third verse, the reference is to the eidetic world of perception, where each sensory experience produces a mental image. It is difficult to discern whether or not the image has a genuine one-to-one correspondence with the original model, whose presence can, at best, only be presumed. In verse 4, consciousness is shown to be split into 3 basic elements: the knower, the known, and knowledge. These are essentially the psychological version of the cosmological structure given in verse 1. Our attention is drawn in the 5th verse to the alternation of consciousness between waking and sleeping, and the tendency of the mind to become discursive and scattered during the wakeful state. The 6th verse highlights the shift of interest from one item to another in a continuous sequence. It is only after covering all the things that can kick the mind out of gear, making it eccentric or off-centered, that the Guru places before the seeker 2 alternative disciplines from which to choose. The first is, do not wake any more, and without sleeping remain as knowledge. Even a cursory look at the differentiating forces enumerated in the 6 previous verses will convince anyone how difficult it is to remain as pure knowledge, let alone to escape the automation of waking and sleeping. The seeker Narayana Guru addresses throughout this book is the self within each of us. He is careful to underline the essential unity of the self, even when describing its possible differentiations. In fact, his main interest so far has been to convince the seeker that his or her essential being is not in any way separate from the one knowledge that permeates all. In verse 1, the Guru asks us, as a mark of initiating the search for self-realization, to prostrate ourselves with devotion and with senses restrained before that shining principle which he calls Karu. This does not mean lying down before an external God or a creator outside, but committing ourselves to the truth that is here and now as this all-filling knowledge, the total reality. The secret of equalizing the outgoing attention and the incoming stimulus is to be seen as the interiorization of the five senses and the filling of oneself with a sense of wonder for the adorable Absolute. The surrender suggested is an exhortation to return to one's own real wholeness. In verse 2, we are invited to share the glory of the effulgent self, adored by contemplatives as the unitive inner cohesiveness of all things, and the homogeneity of the one knowledge to which all names and forms and states of consciousness belong. The Guru especially mentions that one should be relentless in one's search. Any compromise at any level can unwittingly lure the mind off on a tangent. The various isms and ologies are historical testimonials to the sidetracking that has occurred through the millennia. He further cautions that unity, which is a marvel, can be comprehended only when contemplated. Only 1 in a million succeeds in this search, and even then only after extensive lapses. Implicitly, the Guru attributes our failure in this to the selective structuralism of the persona, which causes the search to be initiated on the basis of whatever incipient memory is stimulated at any given time by the changing ensembles of life situations. We become aware of a psychic compulsion pushing us in a certain direction only when it becomes pathologically exaggerated, such as in obsessions, inhibitions, phobias, and manias. Still, the so-called healthy mind is not as free to act on its own as one might wish to believe. Even a scientist who is firmly wedded to a creed of honesty in observing facts is likely to miss negative data when he is otherwise encouraged by some positive observations. Another interesting discipline which Narayana Guru recommends may escape our attention if we do not give sufficient consideration to every word he uses. After bracketing the psychic dynamism, the senses, the body, and the many worlds known by direct perception, he looks beyond to the sun, representing the self, which is to be understood as both the immanent and the transcendent taken together. The Guru does not elaborate his methodology of bracketing, suspension, and phenomenological reduction, as Edmund Husserl takes so much pain to describe in his voluminous writings. He does, however, make an effective polarization of the here and now with the ever and everywhere, by resorting to an analogy for which the entire philosophy of Spinoza can be given as a satisfactory interpretation. The secret of all polarization is that the counterparts of the dialectical situation share a common value, which has made the polarization feasible or even imperative. Mother and child, teacher and taught, ruler and subjects, lover and beloved are all examples of dialectical bipolarity. The common interest in all these cases can be reduced to the experience of happiness. The counterparts are individuals who can reciprocate their thoughts and feelings. But the bipolarity suggested in this verse is not between two individuals. Rather, it is between one's personal awareness and the totality of knowledge. As one of the counterparts is impersonal, the question of reciprocation does not arise. However, bipolarity makes sense only if there is a free flow of the essence of one into the other and vice versa, as in exosmosis and endosmosis. By giving the analogy of the inseparability of waves from the treasury of the oceanic depth, the Guru has already given us the secret of sharing one's essence with the total, even when that total is of an impersonal nature. The example of the wave is not given to dismiss our individuality as a mere phantom, like the form of a wave, but to stress that the seeming separateness of a wave does not deprive it of its vertical relationship with the ocean. The constant awareness of this depth re-establishes one in the lost heritage of union with the Absolute. In verse 4, without resorting to any analogy, Narayana Guru explicitly describes one's true being as pure knowledge and exhorts the self to become identical with it. Pure knowledge transcends the altering states of our physical organism. So it is no more than legitimate to say, remain as pure knowledge and do not become afflicted with any bodily state, such as waking or sleeping. The Guru knows that such a rare identification with the Absolute is not within the easy reach of most people. So he offers an alternative: to engage oneself in the service of a contemplative who has no more questions to be answered and who sees this grand drama going on but is not assailed by it. Thus, with the 7th verse, we are brought to the threshold of entering into a bipolar relationship. It is up to each of us to choose with whom we wish to establish our bipolarity. It can be with a living person in the sense of seeing the Word manifesting through one who is physically present. Or if we have the power of relating to the impersonal, then the living Word is always present in our hearts. Either way, the important thing is that we are committed. If we plant a seed, it needs to remain in one place to grow. It won't survive if it is pulled up every day and put in another place. Bipolarity has the same secret. There must be contiguity, a continuation of natural flow. The sap of a tree has an ascending and descending movement. Like that, there has to be a reciprocal flow between the master and the disciple, between the seeker and the light that is sought. In establishing bipolarity with the master, you should begin the discipline at a physical level, such as making your service directly available to your teacher. This provides you with an opportunity to decipher the meaning of the wakeful world by observing your teacher's reaction to various aspects of it. By pondering upon the words of instruction, you can decode the conceptual images of the world of subjectivity. By observing your teacher's neutral silence, you can learn the secret of abolishing incipient memories. From the teacher's overall identity with the transcendental, you can discover the non-duality of the transcendence to which we all belong. Again and again, in the paths of the profound, there appear brilliant souls of deep understanding and infinite mercy, who are looked upon by the world rightly and gratefully as the true saviors of mankind. Roman Roland speaks of them as midday suns that shine at the zenith and remain with the destiny of man even after their physical disappearance. The Buddha, Socrates, Jesus Christ, and the Prophet Muhammad are well-known examples of such masters who go on shaping the minds and lives of people long after their deaths, despite the vicissitudes of human history. The Buddha was originally Prince Siddhartha, the son of a chieftain of the foothills of the Himalayas. Like any other person, he spent his childhood and early youth waking and sleeping, utterly lost in the confusion of his mind. Although he was pampered by his royal father and was given every form of indulgence, he was stricken with grief when he saw the misery of people all around him. Old age, poverty, disease, and death, which are taken for granted by most people, appeared to the young prince as shameful mistakes that challenged his compassionate disposition. He took the responsibility upon himself to find a lasting remedy to these ills of humanity, to find an answer to the secret of suffering. He renounced his royal palace, dear wife, and beloved child, and passed through discipline after discipline with the hope of becoming awakened to a higher truth. That is the remedy, to wake up from the wakefulness of our everyday life, from the hedonistic indulgences of a royal harem. He went to the other extreme of mortifying his body and mind, but found in that discipline the same despair he had encountered in the pleasurable days of his palace life. Finally, he gave up all hope of waking up from the dreadful dream of a phenomenality and its uncompromising demand for karma. Like a miracle of miracles, a strange homeostasis brought him to the neutral zero that balances good with evil, pain with pleasure, the wakeful with the sleeping, and light with darkness. On touching this point, Siddhartha became awakened and recognized himself as the blessed Buddha, who had discovered the golden middle path, which is neither of waking or sleeping, fasting or feasting. He became very much like the proverbial bird of the Svetasvatara Upanishad, which silently witnesses the activities of its mate without succumbing to the temptation of any phenomenological urge. The state of the awakened one is described differently in various religions. The models are not always similar in their external characteristics. In the Bhagavad Gita, the state of the awakened one is described in the second chapter as Sthita Prajna, well-founded in reason, chapter 2, verses 55 to 68. In the fourth chapter as Jnani, seer, chapter 4, verse 18 to 24. In the fifth chapter as Brahmi Sthiti, one established in the Absolute, chapter 5, verses 23 to 28. In the sixth chapter as Yogi, chapter 6, verses 27 to 32. In the 12th as Bhakta, a true devotee, chapter 12, verses 13 to 20. In the 13th as Kshetrajna Viveka, a true discriminator of the field and its knower, chapter 13, verses 27 to 32. In the 14th as Gunatita, one who has transcended the three modalities, chapter 14, verses 22 to 26. And in the 18th chapter as Brahma Bhutaha, the perfected contemplative, chapter 18, verses 50 to 57. Even a cursory glance at the verses referred to here will give us some idea of a contemplative who has sundered all doubts by becoming awakened to the secret of the alternating phases of consciousness, cryptically epitomized in the sacred syllable Om. There is a passage in the Chandogya Upanishad which says, if a person is kidnapped from his hometown and taken to another city blindfolded and then released, he would still find his way back home. He could just get help and directions from one of several other people along the way. Like that, the bipolarity suggested in this verse for arriving at the true nature of oneself can happen with the help of one person or many. That the real essential bipolarity is with the quality of a person's knowledge. That knowledge is specifically stated here as being conversant with the secret of Om. Om is otherwise known as Pranava, In the Bhagavad Gita, Pranava is praised as the supreme essence of the Vedas, the real scriptures. Krishna identifies it with the Absolute. The Chandogya Upanishad says, "Now then, the Udgita is Om. Om is the Udgita. And so, verily, the Udgita is yonder sun, and it is Om, for it is continually sounding Om." Om in this context is called Anugnya, meaning the word of consent. People wake in the morning when the sun comes up. That is allegorically cited here as the sun giving consent to everyone to get up and engage in various activities. In a world of relative good and bad, pain and pleasure, the truth and untruth, one finds it difficult to agree with others in matters of contradictory values or situations which will spell personal loss. But an absolutist who has transcended all such dualities does not feel restricted or restrained by inhibitions. He gives consent to all. No one is in greater agreement with the world than a realized person. In the Munduka Upanishad, Om is looked upon as an efficient tool to realize the Absolute. Taken as a bow, the great weapon of the Upanishad, one should put upon it an arrow sharpened by meditation, stretching it with a thought directed to the essence of that. Penetrate that imperishable as the mark, my friend. The mystic syllable Om, Pranava, is the bow. The arrow is the soul, Atman. Brahma is said to be the mark, Lakshya. By the undistracted man, it is to be penetrated. One should come to be in it as the arrow in the mark. In the Svetashvatara Upanishad also, Om is looked upon as a means to meditate on the Absolute. By making one's own body the lower friction stick and the syllable Om the upper friction stick, by practicing the friction of meditation, dhyana, one may see the God, Deva, who is hidden, as it were. In the Maitreya Upanishad, Om is identified with a number of triads, as the second form of the self, feminine, masculine, and neuter as the sex form, fire, wind, and sun as the light form, Rudra, Brahma, and Vishnu as the lordship form, the Rig Veda, Yajurveda, and the Sama Veda as the understanding form, earth, atmosphere, and sky as the world form, past, present, and future as the time form, and breath, fire, and sun as the heat form. All these are honored as aspects of Om. The reference to the knower of Om as a wise person worthy of adoration is made in the opening passage of Gaudapada's Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad. According to the Mandukya, the word Om is constituted of the sounds A, U, followed by silence. The A represents Vishwa, the empirical world of name and form. U represents the dream world, Taijasa, which is a self-luminous and self-regulated world of subjective consciousness. And represents an undifferentiated mass of consciousness, Prajna, the presence of which one infers from one's experience of deep sleep. The silence that follows is the final aspect. Of this, the Upanishad says, the fourth is without an element with which there can be no dealing, the cessation of development, benign without a second. This Om is the self, Atman indeed. He who knows this with his self enters the self. Ya, he who knows this. Commenting on this mantra, Gaudapada says, the knower of Brahman, who has realized the highest truth, has entered into the self by burning away the third state of latency, and hence he is not born again, since Turiya has no latency of creation. This agrees with Narayana Guru's description of wise contemplatives as those great ones who ever lived free from birth in silent contemplation, awakened to Om. To become fully conversant with all the implications of knowing Pranava, we recommend that the reader make a detailed study of the Mandukya Upanishad with Gaudapada's Karika, keeping in mind all the implications of the Udgita given in the Chandogya Upanishad. Om is said to have both a lower form and a higher form. The lower form, represented by our wakeful and dream experience, tends to horizontalize the affiliations of consciousness. As a result, both the senses and the mind are assailed by the dualities of pain and pleasure, and good and evil. The higher form of Om, however, represented by Prajna and Turiya, has the power to verticalize consciousness so that it can free itself from all bondages. In the next verse, Narayana Guru gives us the secret of verticalization. The free translation of verse number 7 is, one should remain without waking to distracting interests and without being asleep to the reality of the self. If you cannot do this by realization, you should offer yourself in service to those contemplatives who have gone beyond the dualities of birth and death to know the secret of Om. Om.